Good afternoon. My name is James Stark, Senior Program Officer on LISC's Safety and Justice Team. On behalf of LISC and the National CVI Resource and Field Support Center, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Forming a Community Collaboration to Support Violence Interruption. As with our prior CVI Center webinars, this topic was chosen based upon the feedback you have provided, whether it be through training and technical assistance requests that you've submitted, engagement with CVI experts in the field, such as Urban Peace Institute, who will be leading today's panel discussion, or our team's work in communities across the country. We hear you, and we hope today's webinar will address a common challenge. How can communities building CVI approaches move past existing systems that often pit partners, community partners and neighborhoods against each other for limited resources and create a culture of collaboration to support a common goal, stopping violence in our streets? Before we get started and hear from our special guests from the Department of Justice and from our terrific panel, I want to run through a couple of housekeeping items. Throughout today's webinar, helpful links will be provided in the chat box. We have saved time at the end for panel discussion and questions. If there is something that pops up that you want to share, or there's a question that you want to ask our panelists or the CVI Center staff, please submit those comments in the chat and questions in the Q&A box, both found at the base of your Zoom screen. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar will be recorded and will be available online at the link above. Captions are available and can be turned on or off using the menu at the base of your screen. Please join this conversation through social media using the hashtag CVI Strengthening Communities. And please, we encourage you to meet your peers by introducing yourself, your organization, and what city you are joining us from in the chat. In a few moments, we will hear from Brent Cohen, Acting Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Justice Programs, and Eddie Bocanegra, Senior Advisor in the Office of the Assistant Attorney General. I will then introduce the moderator for today's panel discussion, Melvin Haywood III. After the panel discussion wraps up, we will leave time for Q&A, and we'll leave you with some additional opportunities for engagement with the CVI Center. With that, I want to pass things to a champion and advocate in our field, Mr. Eddie Bocanegra.
Thank you, James. Appreciate you and all the family at LISC. Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. I am right now currently in the city of Philadelphia as we celebrate our Second Chance Conference. And without any further delay, I wanted to introduce another champion who has been really spearheading and supporting our work behind the scenes and sometimes in front to help us ensure that we continue to elevate the importance of this work. And that is our Acting Assistant Attorney General, Brent Cohen.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, James. It's great to be here with you both, and just really appreciate the opportunity to connect with everybody today on this webinar on such an important topic around collaboration and really building a village of support in the work that we do. I appreciate all the work that LISC has done to support the CVI community, and today is another example of leveraging subject matter experts from across the country on the importance of partnership and collaboration. And just also want to say that I'm incredibly grateful to Eddie for his leadership on this work and for bringing his years of expertise from the field to help us stand up this important new initiative, which we did in 2022 here at the Department of Justice. I also want to take a second to thank all of you who have been just absolutely relentless in your engagement in supporting some of our most vulnerable populations across the country, folks who are at risk, at the highest risk, in fact, of being involved in gun violence or being victims of gun violence. And we know there is much overlap in that. It is in large part, because of your work that we are seeing the most significant reductions in homicide and reductions in violence across the country that we have seen in recent history. So it truly is a privilege to join you today as we wrap up this year, wrap up 2024. There is certainly a lot of good work happening around the country, as you all know. Just yesterday, I helped kick off our Second Chance Act conference, the first time we've pulled our Second Chance Act grantees together in 9 years, where we celebrated 15 years since the passage of the Second Chance Act, a bipartisan act much like the CVI initiative was when it passed through the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And we were able to celebrate 15 years of building beyond recidivism. Earlier this month, we convened our CVIPI intermediary partners for 2 days here at the Office of Justice Programs to discuss the work and support that they are providing to the field. And last month, I shared opening remarks at our first OJJDP, that's the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Conference, in 13 years, which is focused on the next 50 years of youth justice. All of this, of course, has tie-ins to the work that we're talking about today, community violence intervention. And speaking of CVI, since the initiative first launched here in 2022, OJP has invested $270 million in funding to support community violence intervention programs and research. These investments have provided direct funding to promising and effective local programs. Collectively, we're supporting well over 100 organizations across the country, primarily nonprofit organizations and local and state governments. And of course, we're also supporting training and technical assistance and intermediary organizations, as well as research. And the research part is key as we look to further prove that CVI should be a part of every jurisdiction's community safety plan. Now, I know, and we know, that this work isn't easy. It truly does take a village to support the people you have been entrusted to care for and to engage those who are at the highest risk of involvement in gun violence. And for this reason, while collaborations and partnerships can sometimes be hard, they are certainly important. And here at OJP, from the very beginning, we have been collaborating too, where we've pulled together 4 of our program offices, 4 of our 6 program offices, to come together and leverage their expertise to support CVIPI. Typically, grant programs are run out of a single office. But here we've pulled together 4 of our program offices, plus my office, in the Office of the Assistant Attorney General. So the National Institute of Justice, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the Bureau of Justice Assistance have all been intimately involved in this work, and certainly collaborating with partners like LISC and other TTA providers. We, in fact, kicked off our very first webinar in 2022, that webinar series with partnership and collaboration. And 2 years later, we're revisiting and elevating these themes again, because we know that violence is a deep and complex problem with no single cause and certainly no simple solution. There's no one-size-fits-all strategy. And, you know, that's really the premise of community violence intervention and the work that you all do in terms of addressing the whole person and the holistic environment in which community violence occurs. It accounts for the intersecting factors that contribute to violence, historic underinvestment, systemic inequities, poverty of opportunity, coupled with patterns of trauma and victimization. And I'm so grateful for the work you're doing, not just as individual organizations, but collectively with partners across communities to address this complex set of issues. So in closing, it is our hope, it's my hope, it is our hope that we can create a public safety landscape that puts the community at the center. In fact, we revised our mission statement at the Office of Justice Programs to talk about communities as co-producers of safety and justice, because we know just how valuable your work is. And we need a landscape that demonstrates the type of village that is needed to successfully support those who are in need. My time at the Department of Justice comes to an end in just a few weeks. But this work does not end and certainly should not end. Community violence intervention existed long before there was federal investment in this space, and I know it'll continue long after. I am also hopeful that federal investment will continue long after I depart this position. What you all do is life-saving work. Again, you have helped to contribute in a large part to some of the most significant declines that we have seen in homicides in history. Please know how grateful I am personally for the work that you all do, how proud I am to have been a part of this work alongside you, and that I will be cheering you on from outside of government as you all continue this work moving forward. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for the difference you're making in people's lives. And thank you for your ability to partner with us and to partner with others across the country. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Brent. So much that I wish I could share right now, but because I also know this is being recorded. The one thing that I just want to say, it's been incredible to have leadership like Brent Cohen and Amy Solomon, who for the last 3+ years have really rolled up their sleeves, put a lot of sweat and equity into ensuring that the work that you are all doing, the work that people who are on this call right now, gets elevated to the highest level of government and gets recognized for the sacrifices and commitments that you all do every single day, in putting your lives at risk, your reputations at risk, sometimes even your families at risk. So, Brent, thank you so much. I know this is not the last time that we'll be seeing you, and we look forward to your ongoing support and championing this work off government, doors. Having said that, I want to take the next couple of minutes to highlight a few things and build on what Brent just shared a second ago and what today's topic of webinar. And I want to start by simply saying, expressing gratitude on behalf of our team. You don't see them on this call right now, but I have the honor of being able to represent and speak for many of my colleagues that Brent mentioned a second ago, the different programs that come together typically, weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, to discuss our work, our investments, to think about how do we unpack and debrief all the stakeholder meetings that we're having, the emails that we receive from you, the webinars, and site visits. So I want to focus a little bit on the site visits. I've had the pleasure in the last several months to really tag team with a wonderful colleague, Reeve Jacobus, who's been a great sounding board, but also someone who's been instrumental in thinking and seeing things that sometimes, one person doesn't always get the chance to see. And so in these site visits, I will tell you that we visited from last 3-4 months. We visited Boston, we visited Minneapolis, different parts of Virginia, including Richmond and Newport News. And there's an ongoing list that even through other colleagues we visited, including DC sites in Baltimore. And we hope that our site visits continue to multiply in the year to come, because these site visits have been really incredible for us in terms of seeing how, just the leadership and the frontline staff, how they're working together. But here's the thing that I want to highlight, is that often when we do these site visits, we ask some fundamental questions. And one of those fundamental questions is tell us who you're partnering with. Talk to us about who you're partnering with and what does that partnership look like? And too often we hear a lot of roses, we hear a beautiful picture, and we're like, no, we recognize that partnerships are not that easy. And Brent highlighted this a second ago. Sometimes they're challenging, sometimes they're hard, but they're necessary as we think about the ecosystems that we're all building here. And I want to say, I want to put an emphasis on this idea of ecosystem, because we recognize that the people that you are serving, those who are at the highest risk of gun involvement, that they are beyond just one program, that we need a platter, a menu of services to support them. And those services could range from mental health to workforce to reentry to housing to a number of other in-between services that we need, including family engagement, street outreach, intervention work, and so on. And so I want to just really put an emphasis on that, because what makes some of our site visits stand out the most is that when you're able to articulate and describe to us what that partnership looks like in your ecosystem. And I cannot put a stronger emphasis on that, because if you tell us, how they say, birds of a feather flock together, it's no difference here. Tell us who your partners are, and we'll tell you exactly who you are. And it is one of the best ways that we also know that there is a better increase of accountability and the opportunities of providing a better support and care for those that you are all saying you are serving. Now, while my time here is limited, and I just want to acknowledge some of those cities that we've been visiting in the last several months, we look forward in the months to come to visit other cities that we have not visited to date. And we do have a long list, and it is our hope that between many of our colleagues, including Reeve and I, that we'll be doing some of these site visits in the months to come. And it is through those site visits that also helps inform what we're going to be funding, where should we be funding, and just thinking about issues and ideas. So with that being said, I want to pass the mic back to a good friend and colleague, Senior Program Officer James Stark, who's been incredible and also an amazing advocate at LISC. James?
Thank you so much, Eddie. To you and to Acting Assistant Attorney General Cohen, thank you for your continued leadership and advocacy for CVI organizations and the resources you have stewarded that are playing such a significant role in advancing this work throughout the country. Over the past several years, there has been great content coming from the Office of Justice Programs, and my colleague Ryan Samuelson, who's been on a prior webinar and will be on future webinars, is going to drop a few important links in the chat. I encourage everyone to check these links out and bookmark them. These are links from the Office of Justice Programs and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The first is the Violent Crime Reduction Roadmap. It highlights 10 essential actions every jurisdiction can take to reduce community gun violence. The OJP CVI resource page, which highlights the work of federally funded CVIPI grantees. And importantly, the OJP current funding opportunities. While there aren't a ton out there right this minute, these are usually populated between the months of February, March, April, May, and June. Whether you are a CVI organization, part of city leadership, law enforcement, schools, or a community stakeholder invested in stopping violence, there are federal grant programs that can support your work. Thanks again to your teams, both Eddie and Acting Assistant Attorney General Brent Cohen, for all of your work in the team's work under the OJP umbrella. I now have the pleasure of introducing one of our great partners, Mr. Melvin Hayward III. Melvin is a Technical Assistance Coordinator at the Urban Peace Institute. As a member of the Urban Peace Academy management team, Melvin is instrumental in bringing community violence intervention training to peacemakers at the local, regional, and national levels. He supports the development of comprehensive training curriculums tailored to the unique needs and challenges of various communities, cities, and organizations. He collaborates closely with the subject matter experts and external partners to integrate best practices, evidence-based and data-driven strategies into community violence intervention training content. Melvin brings significant experience from his previous role as a prevention outreach worker to the Urban Peace Institute. Melvin has a bachelor's degree in business management from the California State University of Northbridge. Melvin, thank you again for moderating this important session. Please take it away.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having us. Like James said, good morning, good afternoon, where everybody's at. My name is Melvin Hayward III, and I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator here at Urban Peace Institute out in Los Angeles. So I would like to just, give a brief intermission on who UPI is, Urban Peace Institute. We are a national social justice nonprofit organization working with communities across the country to develop and implement policy, system, and practice solutions. Our mission, UPI creates community safety and dismantles harmful systems to transform justice and ensure freedom from violence. And briefly about our work, UPI provides technical assistance to stakeholders working to implement CVI strategies across the country. Our approach is driven by the needs of community members and practitioners. So again, happy to be on this call with everybody. We do have, before we get into introductions, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, right? So today we're going to be talking about forming a community collaboration, talking about the importance of partnerships, building out, a CVI ecosystem and what it looks like, what it entails, and some of the things that you all should be privy to as you work towards, refining that ecosystem or building it out from the ground up. So I want to start with CVI ecosystem, right? So an ecosystem driven by city leadership, which connects the city's violence prevention infrastructure, including community-based organizations, Office of Neighborhood Safety and Public Health departments, to implement comprehensive strategies to address violence dynamics. Now, when we talk about a city led infrastructure, again, it varies, right? From city to city, state to state, county to county. So it's just whoever is leading the efforts in those respective communities, right? So whether it's a hospital-based violence intervention program, whether it's the programs that are doing violence intervention and prevention, it all just varies within the communities and the cities that you all work on. but they don't necessarily have to be city-led strategies or county-led strategies. It's just whoever is leading the CVI ecosystem in those communities. So with that being said, I would like to introduce three of our panelists who's going to be joining us. So we're going to be having, these candid conversations. I'll start with my first colleague, Ben Taco Owens, who is a CVI specialist here at Urban Peace Institute in Los Angeles, California. Our second panelist is going to be Reverend Eileen Smith, who is the executive director of South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And last but not least, Roy Moore, who is the co-director of community care team, Healing Hurt People, doing phenomenal work out in Portland, Oregon. Good morning, good afternoon to all of my panelists. How are you all feeling today?
Good afternoon, Melvin. Feeling well today. Honored to be a part of this.
All
Yes.
right.
Thank you very much for having us. Feeling good and excited to meet with you all and discuss the great work that's happening.
All right, beautiful. What I would like to do, before we go ahead and get started, into the conversation, just give a brief introduction. So Reverend, I'll start with you. If you can just tell me a little bit more about, the work that you all are doing at South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace, and most importantly, what brought you to this work, right? So again, this work isn't for everybody, and by work, we mean CVI work. What brought you to this field, and just talk a little bit about some of the work that you all are doing out in Pittsburgh.
Well, Melvin, you said it. This work isn't for everybody. It's a calling. And so basically, wearing the many hats that I do, I was called to this work. Probably at the age of 12 years old, where we were required to do community service. And then my background and training as a registered nurse, and I still hold that license, and working in the specialty areas of intensive care, trauma, emergency room. And from there, went to public health as a nurse consultant for the Pennsylvania Department of Health Violence and Injury Prevention consultant, which entailed my work in 11 counties. And then my many years of pastoring and burying victims of gun violence. My role on a local foundation board, which was part of my job, whose focus was on violence prevention for South Pittsburgh, which was and still is a hotspot. And I serve to this day as a board member, which specifically brought me to creating the South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace under the auspices of the Birmingham Foundation after the fatal shooting of a 15-year-old Carrick High School student in the parking lot of the school. And after retiring from the Department of Health in 2014, was quickly thrust into managing the South Pittsburgh Coalition from the board perspective, and as grants were leveraged, became the executive director. And we do a number of programs, CVI, we have our Cure Violence Peacemakers. We do workshops on the effects of trauma, violence, gun violence on the community, suicide prevention, Dare to Dream youth programs, and just a little bit of everything that has to do with gun violence. But our focus is on our street violence intervention specialists and our outreach workers.
All right. Thank you, Reverend, for laying out that foundation of the phenomenal work that you all are doing. Brother Roy, I'm gonna pass it to you. Can you talk a little bit about, your team out in Portland, Oregon, and what brought you to this work, the CVI work?
Thank you, Brother Melvin. And once again, thank you for having us. My name is Roy Moore. I am the co-director of the community care team in Healing Hurt People at Portland OIC here in Portland, Oregon. POIC primarily does four things. We've been around for 50 years, but we do education with our 7 alternative schools, workforce development. We have pre-apprenticeship programs, also a culinary school, public safety. I oversee a staff of 52 violence interventionists all throughout the city, employing all types of strategies from cure violence to life coaches to outreach and some other trauma and violence impacted family strategies. We also do health and wellness. I came to this work because I'm a survivor of gun violence. I come from that lifestyle. I was able to change my life. And as many of us know, when we have the ability to change our life, we have an innate ability inside of us, a yearning to give back to our community. And so, tired of seeing my people die, tired of causing harm. and wanted to be a part of the solution, as we say. And so that's my passion. That's why I do what I do, but I'm also good at what I do. And I say that because it takes for us to recognize that we are the content experts. And I'm good at what I do. And I know I can lead the pack, but I also can inspire the next generation. And I also can set the tone by these initiatives being successful in our communities so we can, receive the funding needed to do this work. My passion is there. Once again, I'm a survivor of gun violence. I know what it's like. And so through that lens, I show up to work every day. And I'm proud of what we're doing here in the city of Portland.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brother Roy. Couldn't agree more. And last but not least, my colleague Taco. Taco, again, just talk about some of the work that you're doing out here in Los Angeles and nationwide, and what brought you to this field of CVI work.
All right. Well, first off, good afternoon, everyone. And before I talk about the great work that's being done here in Los Angeles, I just want to say that I am overwhelmed and extremely inspired whenever I see so many peacemakers, so many people in the CVI space to come on a webinar or to join a meeting or whatever, and knowing collectively across this country that there's allies and colleagues that are working hard in various communities across this country to make it safe. So shout out to everybody that's on this call, everybody that's doing this work. Again, very, very inspirational. Part of my work here in Los Angeles is to train folks in the CVI space, those who are learning what to do, what not to do, how to remain safe, how not to jeopardize their freedom, how to maintain peace in our communities. Los Angeles being one of the gang capitals of the world, a lot of work to do in terms of community violence. But again, couldn't do it without the help of our colleagues here and without the support or the investment that's poured into this work. So I do some training here and abroad across the country, but I also do more hands-on with CBOs and individuals that are in practice of CVI work, meaning pulling up on them, sitting down with them, seeing what their programs look like, seeing if there needs to be any adjustments. However, we could help in a sense of TTA support and making sure that things are going in the direction that their contract might say, but most importantly, what the community needs are. So again, I'm always honored to be in the presence of other peacemakers, and I'm looking forward to this webinar.
All right. Thank you, Taco, Reverend Arlene Smith, and Roy for sharing. Again, so let's get into it, right? So we're here to talk about, community collaborations, partnerships, and overall just building out this CVI ecosystem, right? So, Taco, I'm actually going to start with you with this question. You've been a part of the work here in Los Angeles for 25 plus years, right? And you've seen a lot, you've been around a lot. But you were, one of those key instrumental figures in helping put together the CVI ecosystem here that we have in Los Angeles. So I'll start with you and then I'll follow up with, the rest of our panel. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important to build a CVI ecosystem and what benefit it has to the community, to the people that we serve, and to our partners?
Okay, yeah. So it's important to build this ecosystem because it's not going to get done individually. It's not going to get done by one entity or one person, one remedy. But collectively, you have to have a team, which is in essence an ecosystem or the recipe or the ingredients to make it work. In Los Angeles County alone, there's 12 million people. And in the city, there's 4 million people. And granted that there's people out there that's doing great work. We have an extremely diverse community. We have different forms of community challenges, in particularly how it relates to violence. And so having that ecosystem affords us the opportunity where there's those gaps, where we might have situations where there's community violence taking place, But again, we don't have the capacity to serve as a resource. So we have to learn to reach across the table, go next door, and find those resources that are there, first off, that are available within the ecosystem, and leverage that. Again, because there's different resources out there, and the fact that our ecosystem, we all rely on each other. The benefit of that is where we do find those gaps are the inability to collaborate or even communicate sometimes. Sometimes we'll see multiple agencies servicing a particular area, but nobody's communicating, nobody's talking, nobody's uh, letting folks know where they're at. And then there's these jurisdictional issues or whatever. But when we collaborate and communicate and have an understanding what folks' roles are, what they can and can't do, what resources they offer, that is the benefit of the ecosystem, because now we know where the resources are, and we know if there was a presumption that, hey, those guys over there, they get their resources and they're serving this particular part of the community, we need to know why and where and who to send over there. Again, I believe that there's more resources in our community um, that we know about. But again, if we could just, communicate a little bit better. And again, here in Los Angeles, we've kind of like turned the corner on that over the past 10 years. We built coalitions and had town hall meetings and consistent, I mean, weekly meetings with other nonprofits or other folks who are within the ecosystem and who provide CVI services. On a weekly basis, we engage one another. So those are some of the things that we're doing, some of the things that we've done, and some of the best practices for us.
Yes, sir. Thank you for sharing, Taco. And Reverend, I'll pass the same question to you out there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Um, how do you build, how have you been a part of building that CVI ecosystem that's in place? And what have been the benefits that you've been able to see from having a CVI ecosystem infrastructure?
Sure. Well, the South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace is an ecosystem structure in that it is a conglomerate of over 90 agencies that are committed to the prevention of violence in South Pittsburgh communities. And we do provide an array of services and opportunities for community residents, and we're a voice and a vehicle for all community members in South Pittsburgh. The agency consists of grassroots organizations, providers, businesses, community residents, county, city government, public health, and members of the community. And basically, how to form a CVI ecosystem is exactly what we did back in 2005. We got the buy-in, first of all, by engaging community members, and we conducted a community violence assessment. And then we formed a community collaboration and brought the stakeholders to the table for regular meetings. We implemented CVI, which was basically volunteer until we were able to obtain a small grant to hire a very part-time program coordinator, which actually set the CVI piece up for success. And then we implemented several CVI programs, including street violence intervention, provider workshops, trauma workshops, youth programs, and other relevant workshops, and an array of services and educational opportunities. The South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace and its providers seek to build communities that are peaceful and nurturing through the ecosystems which support the community holistically and works to strengthen partnerships that aid the efforts of the South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace. And then we sustain success and continuous improvement by connecting our violence prevention infrastructure with a county-wide infrastructure to implement comprehensive strategies and to measure success. And we'll be probably talking about that a little later on in the webinar. So thank you.
No, thank you for sharing. And Brother Roy, if you can share again, just talk about how you were a part of, and your organization a part of building that CVI ecosystem out in Portland. And what benefits have you been able to see from being a part of the ecosystem that you were a part of building as well?
Thank you for that. And thank you for all the wisdom that the other panelists have given. Our perspective from my vantage point is that we're still a work in progress and it's ever evolving. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people on this call, because through politics and through funding, things have changed. But what I will say, the part that we have played with being one of the older organizations that are doing this work is being leaders in the space and trying to make sure that we have an infrastructure, a fundamental infrastructure of community when it comes to that ecosystem, right? And so it's really identifying the gaps. I've been around long enough to know what it's like to work in silos, but also to bring people together. And as we know, there's always new funding coming. There's always new opportunity, which brings new guests to the table, are people who should be at the table. So something that's happened great here in the city of Portland is that more funding came through, like a lot of cities. So we were able to really dive into our grassroots organization, provide trainings, and be leaders in this space to help them, and provide technical assistance to help them build up an infrastructure to really do great work in this space. But once again, identifying where the gaps are and who should be at the table. And something that we have done through the Office of Violence Prevention, and we've had change in leadership in that area, but what we have done is work closely with them to once again make sure the fundamentals are always there. So no matter what changes, what funding goes away, who leaves the table, we still have this infrastructure of the key players meeting monthly, meeting weekly to go over those data points, to talk about where the gaps are, and to talk about trends. So let's talk about that, because data and trends should dictate what our work looks like. So we've been able to create a robust system in that way. But what I can say, and something I would love to hear more from the panelists and other ideas on what it's like when it evolves and it's ever changing and funding changes, what the landscape looks like. How do we stay strong and have the strength in the numbers? Because that's something that we constantly have to work at. The benefits of that, though, is being able to learn new ideas and to be innovative. A lot of times we can get stuck and complacent on doing the same work, working with the highest risk or intensive case management. But with new generations, with new trends, we have to evolve with the violence that we're seeing. And so having an ecosystem, not only in my state, but to be a part of it nationwide, has really opened my mind to new initiatives and new ways, innovative ways that we can address, our community's needs, but also the violence to bring it down.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And like you all said, right, there's no one organization that can do it all. That's the benefit of us knowing that and being collaborative and forming these partnerships. And Roy, just like you talked about, a big part of this ecosystem is funding, right? Funding is one of those primary efforts that can dictate how a CVI ecosystem is in place, how roles and responsibilities are established. So it's important to understand where the dollars are coming from and how they're being allocated, and making sure that they're really touching the ground, right? Because oftentimes middlemen can come into the way and these dollars aren't reaching our communities how they should be, right? So, Roy, I'm actually going to kick this question off with you. When we talk about building a CVI ecosystem, how does different funding sources kind of dictate the direction of the CVI ecosystem when you're, again, building it, or whether you're working to, improve it, scale it up? How does the direction of dollars and funding dictate that?
Great question. It's a big part of it, but I'm gonna start with the word trust. Funding comes and goes. Funding is finicky. Funding is political. So there's a trust factor when it comes to when we talk about, funding being the topic when it comes to our ecosystem. So one, understanding that is that funding will dictate who's at the table, unfortunately and fortunately, right? But understanding that we cannot have that crab in the barrel, we had to address this. So I'm just going to talk about it. I'm sorry, you guys. We had to address this, right? Because what happens with systems is they give us funding, but we become crabs in the barrel. community, we start fighting for the same dollars. So now we're fighting for the same initiatives to save the same people in the same communities, which impacts our trust for each other. So we had to talk about that. And sometimes that looks like taking the gatekeeping from the systems like the OVPs. So our OVPs did a great job, and this is not to knock them because they have their challenges. But we noticed early off that they were trying to build the ecosystem. They were trying to build the foundation to have that ecosystem, but sometimes that's not the best way. And so what we identified is we need that portion, but us as the community need to have that as well. So we created our own referral systems. We created a group me chat that this is just the people doing the violence prevention work. We created a group me chat that we all correspond on, because what happened in those forums where systems were creating these meetings and these ecosystems meetings, we weren't being real, and the trust factor wasn't there. So that's just one way when it comes to funding, because we have several strategies and organizations receiving funding from our Office of Violence Prevention. Once again, who I love and who are doing great work, funded through the mayor's office. And the city of Portland has seen a lot of challenges. If you're not familiar, the president is not a fan of our state. And so since George Floyd, we get a lot of bad publicity for what our city is experiencing, right? But also more funding comes for new issues. So what we've seen, data has shown that there's been an increase of gun violence in our houseless community, right? And also our Black and brown people, that number has increased in our houseless community. So the hot topic went from violence prevention, a lot of funding with the ARPA, to state dollars and city dollars, now focusing on our houseless population. So being able to understand that we need to pivot, because there is intersection in these two issues, but pivot and also address those strategies through the new funding. But also, people lose funding. This is why we need to support each other. People get grants that they don't have the infrastructure to hold. And so they go under without the support of the communities. For the more established organizations who are doing this work, not coming together, that can affect who's at the table. People doing great work who just did not have the infrastructure to carry it out. So when we talk about funding and ecosystems, my word is support. And let's not let the funding dictate where our trust is, but let us build it by working together and understanding systems are going to fund these things, but we have to internally make sure that we're supporting and we have strength within ourselves to carry these strategies out, because funding changes with trends, topics, violence, and issues.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Roy, for sharing that. And you hit it on the head, right? All of us that's doing this work understand that this is relationship-based work. And the fundamental core of having a relationship is trust, right? You said it. Funding is going to come and go, but we have to work on building trust with one another, having relationships, but also having some terms of accountability amongst each other, right? So having individual accountability amongst ourselves and our agencies, individual accountability amongst other entities that are in the ecosystem, but group accountability. So it's important that, we have these systems set in place. And Roy, like I said, you hit it on the head. And Reverend, what I would like to do is pass it to you. And can you talk a little bit about the same question, right? How does funding dictate what the CVI ecosystem landscape looks like, from your perspective in your community?
Sure. Well, you said it, funding. The goal was to provide adequate funding and coordination with a shared vision of public safety to maximize the response to highest risk individuals and make violence reduction sustainable. We were a small coalition of agencies, an organization, if you will, with 2 people on the ground, an unpaid, executive director, and mostly consisted of volunteers. So we were basically, stuck, if you will, but doing the best that we could. We've been blessed because we are in the 2nd year of the Allegheny County Community Violence Reduction multi-year grant. And you just can't do one grant and then, your work goes on. It has to be multi-year grants. And that consists of several grassroots community-based grantees, which has implemented a required CVI ecosystem called Allegheny County Peace Alliance, which is basically our funders who are the ones who require this. And there's a convener and their committee and quarterbacks, such as myself, who actually wrote the CVRI grant for South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace, which consisted of 3 evidence-based programs, which was CURE, Becoming a Man, and the Ready Chicago model, which we renamed ACTS. And program and outreach coordinators attend, and others who are required to attend regular meetings presided over by the funded convener. And then there are committees and heads of those committees. In each meeting, the grantees give reports on their violence prevention initiatives and any challenges that the ecosystem can assist with as a whole. And the ACPA, which is the Allegheny County Peace Alliance, consists of 42 violence prevention agency leaders representing of the county, the city, and their victim assistance and response agencies, public health, the local county health departments, school districts, hospitals and healthcare systems, city and county police, hospital-based initiatives, community-based street violence initiatives, such as South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace, Cure Violence, REACH, BAM, and other youth initiatives. Gun violence prevention advocates such as Ceasefire, gang violence prevention initiatives such as Amani Pittsburgh, re-entry programs. The U.S. Attorney's Office is part of this ecosystem, local police departments, foundations, all coming together on one accord. And so the South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace is actually an ecosystem within a larger ecosystem. And it really has been working wonderfully well. We're still, growing and learning, but I believe that we are all on the right track. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for sharing. Like you said, just you all been an ecosystem within an ecosystem is amazing, right? Because there's so many different things to take into account, different things to factor in, and we're going to talk about it a little later, some of the challenges that come with building and maintaining the ecosystem. But again, you guys are all doing phenomenal work. And Brother Taco, last but not least, I'd like to ask you the same question, right? When we talk about funding, how does funding dictate the direction of the CVI work in, respective communities nationwide?
Well, I think I've heard some brilliant answers. It's kind of hard to follow. For us, when we look at funding, I think first off, it's the source. If we're looking at government funding, which is i.e. taxpayer funding, we know that it comes with restrictions. Sometimes that hamper our efforts or outreach. It comes with strings attached. It kind of determines and in some cases dictate what we can do with that funding, where we can put it, and who we can hire. We can have the best people, but again, they come from a lived experience space or may not be able to pass a background. Then again, that's because of the funding source is government funding. It's coming from the city, the county, state, the government, and you can't hire that person or you can't spend money on this or spend money on that. So some of the challenges there are, we have to find a way how to navigate them. Also with government funding, we find that there's a timeline attached. You get a grant, it's 2 years, 3, 5, whatever. And during those years, you got to figure out like where's the next 3 years going to come from. Private funding is a little bit different, a little bit more liberated in a sense to where they kind of yield to the CBOs as to how they're going to spend it, when, where, who, and why. But a part of that, sometimes we lose in terms of evaluation. Some private funders don't require that you have an evaluation. And sometimes it's difficult to measure the great work that's being done when we have private funding. So we try to keep it a standard, like we're going to do the work and we're going to we'll give the community the best work in terms of saving lives and making the community safer. Doesn't matter who's providing the funding, but it is important that, you know, we consider that at some point we have to shift gears and become self-sustainable to continue to do this work. And our reliance shouldn't be on the government or private funders because that could disappear. Folks are kind of sitting on their hand now with the new administration coming in office. Some folks are, you know, neutral. It's not going to impact them. Some folks are packing up and ready to go, and some folks are positioning themselves saying, we're going to be okay. So yeah, it's real tricky when you're talking about funding, but if you position yourselves and establish yourself and kind of like forecast what it's going to look like or what the potential could be, I think you'll be in a safe place. My last thing is a lot of us, and in my tenure of doing this work and supporting other CBOs, is sometimes is that we find that the back office support may not be there. And you can have people that do great work, they change the city, they, you know, they impact lives and reduce violence in large portions, but they have a credit score of minus 116, which is indicating that they're not good with money. So they can, you know, manage the community and have a great impact, but they don't do the back office stuff very well. And so sometimes the support is needed there because we'll find a lot of CBOs subcontracting either with another larger CBO or a CBO that's not necessarily familiar with CVI work, but has the fiscal capacity to help them, or sometimes they'll subcontract through the city. And it could be a police department, you know. And so sometimes those are challenging when it comes to dealing with the community. The community wants to know who they're working with. Are they working with the community? Are they working with law enforcement, the government? Are they working with the agency down the street or the church? So we have to get to a space where the CBOs that are providing this great CVI work that's being done across this country, to make sure that they're scaling up and getting that back office work done and getting the support there so they can be able to receive the fundings that they need directly.
Yes, sir, Taco. And to all of you all's points for laying out a lot of fundamental topics. Part of again building this ecosystem out, forming these partnerships, the collaboration, it comes like Roy said from the trust, right? Which comes from relationship building. And whenever you guys are getting different entities together, there's bound to be challenges that are going to arise, right? There's never anything that's going to run smoothly, perfectly, consistently, all of the time. And like Eddie Bocanegra said earlier, tell us the real, right? Not the peachy, you know, don't let us say, you know, who are your partners, but everything's working good, everything's fine. Because there's always ways that we can improve our partnerships, always ways that we can improve our collaboration, making sure that everybody again is held accountable on an individual and on a group level. And so again, because you all have been integral parts in your CVI ecosystems in place, and Reverend, I'll start with you. What are some of the challenges that you've had to face, right? And when we talk about challenges, this can, you know, range, but please talk about some of the challenges that you've had to face and how you were able to overcome, if you were able to, or see through some of these challenges that you've been able to face while building that ecosystem out.
Absolutely, Melvin. And it always comes with challenges, even when you're getting, you know, enough money and all of those sort of things. But the biggest challenge has been lack of adequate funding sources and resources that is able to adequately compensate what we do. It's never enough. But what we have been able to accomplish with this multi-year grant has certainly been an amazing help for that. There are also always political and ideological differences. Must always be bipartisan. Let's get it together. Okay, violence affects everybody. We don't care what your status is, what political office, whatever. Eventually, it's coming to your doorstep as well. So let's all agree And focusing on those most at risk, we have to make sure we are getting to the highest risk individuals out there. And that can only be done through our CVI workers and our outreach workers as well. There has to be adequate evaluation and data analysis. And we're very blessed to have a data analysis that works for the county, who provides all that data, make sure that we're getting the right data. Nick Carter is just excellent at what he does. And then there has to be, like Roy said, trust, building that trust. Are y'all credible? You know, you'll mess up the money. What you about? Do we trust the system? Okay, because let's be honest, basically, these grants are filtering down from government, state, and they're not people of color. So we have to be able to overcome that and go and get this funding and go out and do what we need to do. A weak infrastructure, we see that all the time. Lack of strong leadership and committees as well. Not getting the buy-in. You can't do anything unless you got the buy-in of the stakeholders who basically keep that ecosystem together. And then you have to keep the stakeholders coming. Then there's always inconsistency with meetings. When you're funded and your funder says, oh, you're going to have collective meetings, okay, you will have collective meetings and you will make them interesting, so that the people come. And I'm talking about people from the community, the neighborhood. And sometimes you have too many meetings. Meetings can't get any work done from having meetings. So our funders need to take a look at that also. And then getting the policymakers involved. And we also do that through our state representatives, our local state representatives who have gone to bat for us when we didn't have any money. We were down to zero funds. And she went to the state and got us some money to tide us over until our grant came through. So those are the challenges, but basically it's always inadequate funding.
Yeah, and again, it can't be said more. I've been privileged to be around the Los Angeles Violence Intervention Coalition here in Los Angeles, which Taco is a member of. And that was the sentiment, right? We were able to push collectively with about 22 nonprofit organizations, push for 60K baseline for workers that are doing the frontline intervention, street outreach, gang intervention work. So you're right. Inadequate funding plays a big role into some of the challenges that arise. So, Brother Roy, I'm gonna pass it to you. What are some of the challenges that you have seen, coming from your perspective out in Portland, Oregon, when it comes to, building a CVI ecosystem or just relationship building with the partners, collaboration, people holding each other accountable? What are some of the challenges that you've been able to see and potentially overcome, if you have, or push through, to again ultimately scale up and make the ecosystem better and healthy?
Yes, thank you for that. And the Reverend really hit on some key points that I thought really resonated with us, as far as I thought just logistically. When I think about some of the challenges that we had, like calling meetings in the evenings on a Friday evening, people can't make it there or they're not engaged, not feeding people, not having, at sometimes to identify funding to hold an ecosystem meeting. Like, these are all things that are needed at times to get people at the table. But focus, intentionality. If it's trust building that we need, let's really spend some time on that. We bring everybody to the table does not mean that it's going to be, kumbaya. If there's trust building, we have to be very, very focused on building that trust before we can get any work done. So that's focus, intentionality, right? We have to look at those things, holding people accountable. A way we hold people accountable is identifying who has what role. So many times we come in with the helper's hat. We want to come in and we want to say, okay, I want to do this. We're going to do this. But as was mentioned earlier, not one organization can do all the work. So being very, very specific on who has what role. So then we can then hold the people accountable. If we're all doing the same thing and we're all trying to pick up the drop balls, then we can't hold each other accountable. We're not going to have real conversations. And it's not to downgrade, but it's actually, we have a lot at stake here. Not only is it the credibility of the CVI work, but it's also our communities, right? So we have to all be on the same page that accountability is a part of this strategy. And we all accept that when we show up to this space, that we are going to be held accountable. Logistical things, bylaws. So many times, people weren't calling out the bylaws. What are the rules of engagement in this meeting? We overlook small things like that, but we as people understand that we know how to get the work done, but sometimes we don't understand the science behind working together. And things like that are needed. So those are some of the challenges that we've seen that we had to address. Also, having the flexibility, as we talked about, to pivot. People and organizations will leave this, but we cannot stop the movement if they leave. So once again, understanding everybody's roles, but having a backup plan. What I mean by that is, okay, if POIC is workforce development, okay, who am I partnering with on my workforce development strategy and making sure that I bring them to the table, because I that's a part of the work that I'm engaging in. So if anything was to happen, because we all know, Lord forbid, people get new jobs and people move up and all these great things, we still have that that perspective or that at the table. Another thing that we identified that was a challenge here in the city of Portland is the political landscape. We cannot be afraid to have the right people at the table, but address the political landscape, right? Because if we're not addressing that, that's always going to dictate what our powers are. Like I said, we had a change in leadership. We had somebody in our council who wasn't a fan of this work. And so it was always a challenge to try to move the needle with this person because of their disposition or their perspective. When that changed, we had to bring the new person up to speed. But if we would have had the foresight to see that this is a part of the political landscape, then we would have been able to navigate that a little better because it set us back. So I think just really, really being intentional on what it's going to take for us all to work together. But once again, I cannot stress the importance of those small logistical rules of engagement of how we work together, because it goes a long way and then save you the trouble of trying to navigate that once those challenges arrive.
Yes, Roy, especially again, you hit it on the head, especially with how nuanced this work is, right? There's still so many people that are not privy to the work of community violence intervention and everything that lies within the ecosystem. It's important to set clear and concise rules of engagement, expectations. So that way, again, there's a sense of community within those that are part of the collaboration and partnership, but also when new folks are coming in, right? When those missing pieces that you guys identify come into the role, they are clear and understanding of what's being asked of them, what their role is in this ecosystem, and how they play a part in, again, ultimately building and scaling up that ecosystem. And lastly, Taco, I want to pass the same question to you before we get ready for our last question. Is again, when we talk about, challenges, what are some of the challenges that you've seen or you've been a part of that came up with the CVI ecosystem, and how have you been able to push through or, overcome some of those challenges that have arisen?
Well, some of it again was outlining the like Roy talked about, the rules of engagement in the CVI space. You're going to have government, you're going to have private, you're going to have CDOs, FBOs, and law enforcement in there somewhere. Where there's violence, there's crime. Where there's crime, there's law enforcement. And just setting those rules of engagement that the CVI space is not there to solve crimes, but more so to prevent violence from happening in our communities. I think we've established that CVI does work. We know that it works. There's an investment there from the federal government down to the local government to tribal government. And so folks believe in it. But we have to, be mindful that we all have a role and a lane that we play or that we stay in within this ecosystem for obvious reasons. It's extremely dangerous work, and it's work that's relied upon those who are providing those services to make the community safe out of trust. So establishing that, it started off kind of bumpy, but as professionals, because we don't just qualify ourselves as people who just go out into the hood and put fires out, but we are professionals. And it goes back to the base salary that you talked about, what we have here in Los Angeles. The base salary of a intervention worker is $60,000 starting salary. But with that, you get a trained CVI specialist. It's someone who's gone through the training and who've earned that certification to be qualified as a professional. But also they held accountable to the standards within this work. I mean, outside of what the contract might say for them to work or their background check, collectively within our coalition, within our colleagues, we have some standards that we apply to this field of work, whether it's folks committing crimes or doing things that's, that's not likely to benefit the community, and we hold them to that standard. And if folks not doing right by those standards, we'll call them on it. And, maybe they need to find a different occupation to be involved in if it's going to, bring harm or make the industry look bad. So we just don't hire people and say, here's $60,000. You have to earn it, and you have to earn it with integrity. I think the last thing would be the understanding to utilize the data and the importance of data and show why CVI works. We've had challenges where there's data that's out there that didn't necessarily reflect the data that we had. For instance, gang-related violence. And it was perceived that anything that happened in the hood, it was the gang's fault. The gangs did it. How? Because it happened in the hood. And so what was being reported that it was this, and in actuality, it was that. So we had two differences on what data was being collected, because the data being collected over here was saying there's gangs over here that creating a big problem and we need more or new police cars. And we're saying, no, it's not gang, it's community violence, and we need more interventionists. But again, based on the data that was involved to make the decisions, and that would determine where the funding would go, how much was needed there. And again, we had to work it out, but again, part of that was, working through those challenges. We don't necessarily have to agree with everything, but we have to stay at the table and have these conversations for the greater sake of making our community safer. We continue to come back to the table. Even when we don't necessarily agree with each other's opinions or ideas or concepts, but eventually we work it out.
Yeah, and thank you again. Thank you for sharing. Again, we talked about a lot right now, right? And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to have time for one more two-part question before we open it up for questions. Again, you guys have dropped a lot of gems, a lot of seeds for folks to take and utilize in their communities, in their cities, in their states, their counties. But I also want to ask you all this, right? So Taco, I'll actually start with you. When we talk about, the CVI ecosystem and things that are in place for a place that's brand new, for example, somebody that's very new to the work, an entity, an agency, a city, a county that's brand new to the work, what advice would you give them to help begin the foundation of building out their CVI ecosystem, beginning to scale it up? Or what, for those that already have some type of ecosystem in place and it might be outdated, it might be, it might not have been scaled up in the past couple of years, whatever the case may be, what advice do you have for those that are just looking to build out? Or what advice do you have for those that are looking to improve and scale a current ecosystem that's in place?
I would say know the community that you're going to serve. It would be great if we could just save the whole world. But I think when we're intentional of a specific community or specific task, we can kind of hone in and do great work there and come to the understanding that we can't do everything. And that's the importance and the benefit of having an ecosystem, is that, you know, what you can't do, perhaps your partners can, or you find it within the ecosystem, or you build it within the ecosystem. But the importance is the overall objective of why we do this work is to make our communities better and safer and empower them. So we always want to make sure that whatever we're doing is going to benefit the community. The funding is for the community. Yes, people should get paid for the great work that they do, but the great work that they do should impact the community. So I would say for me would be initially look into the community, to see what their needs are, what their concerns are, where those gaps are, and then determine what is it that you can do, what can you do, and then evaluate what's it within the ecosystem. If it's not something that you can do, look around in your ecosystem, look across the table, look at your partner, and see what is it that they can provide that can help make the community safer and better.
Yeah, thank you, Taco. Reverend, I want to ask you part of this question, and then Roy, I'm going to give you the second part of it. So, Reverend, for again, you all South Pittsburgh Coalition for Peace, being an ecosystem within an ecosystem, what advice or what practical steps would you give organizations or agencies just looking to build out CVI in their communities? What advice would you give them to help the starting steps, the foundational blocks of building out that CVI ecosystem where they're at?
First of all, like Ben said, community assessment. You have to do that community assessment, find out what are the needs of your community. And then you have to do frequent evaluations, regular reports, get new leadership, committees to assess the efficacy of the CVI ecosystem and establish what is not working. Do we need to bring others to the table? Are we reaching the highest risk population? Forming relationships? Are we reducing risk factors to gun violence? And then we have to tap into collaboration across the field, local, state, national. This equals power. And we have a number of national partners that I can call up on the phone and say, hey, Dr. Eddie, okay, what about this? What advice do you have for me? And I'm hoping to acquire some partners just from being on this webinar. And then you have to seek continuous funding. You just can't stop with one funding source, because that funding can be pooled or whatever. You always have to have other funding sources to even enhance paying of your CVI workers and giving them benefits, and get those multi-year grants and those impact grants, and get funding that comes with technical assistance and requirements. Okay, you required to do this because we gave you that money. Nothing wrong with that. Grassroots, local, state, federal policy development and advocacy leads to support program expansion and grassroots organizations. And then educate as to change, strengthen programs and change the conversation, such as gun violence is a public health problem disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities, and one of the leading causes of death for African American men. We knew this. We did not have to wait for an announcement from the White House to tell us that this was a public health problem, and everybody's running around like they didn't know. We knew it. Okay, we, and I mean our CVI collaboration, you guys, everybody on here, we already knew that. So, and you have to broaden your research capacity. That is imperative, because it's all about data. You can't get a grant unless you can produce some data. And it's difficult for grassroots organizations to get these huge grants, because they are grassroots, and a lot of them do not have the capability to collect this data or hire people to do it, because they don't have the money to do it. That's why they're writing for the grants in the first place. So, but tag along, hook on with another collaborative. Thank you.
No, thank you for sharing. And last, Brother Roy, if you can answer this part. So, Reverend Eileen and Taco answered the first part, but the second part is quite frankly, there's ecosystems that are just outdated, right? A lot of stuff just hasn't been updated. There's been minimal scaling. They haven't been able to identify key partners that need to be a part of the movement. There's been a lack of accountability. So what would you give in terms of some practical advice? What advice would you give to those that are looking to they know that they have a CVI ecosystem in place and infrastructure, but it's just outdated and they're looking to scale it up. They're looking to push it forward. They're looking to move the needle. What advice would you give to places that are stuck, in those boundaries right there?
Yeah, Brother Melvin, Reverend Eileen and Taco, they hit the nail on the head. And I'm just going to reiterate what they said because I think it also answers that question. Open your world. I'll just give you perspective. I cannot tell you how beneficial it has been to attend all the conferences and what I learned when I'm there. That's where I met you, Melvin, and Brother Taco. And so that's where we're going to find what's cutting edge, because together we know things are happening at a different pace in different states, right? And so if you are in a complacent state of ecosystem or nothing's really happening, I encourage you to reach out and find out, have the conversation that we had today on this panel. One, what was your challenges? And then what are you doing to continue the great work? Another thing is, change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And the way you address that is by constantly doing assessments. I cannot stress enough how much internal assessments, ecosystem assessments really benefits if what we're doing is still working or where we need to go. So open your world, collaborate, network, find out what's happening around you in the ecosystem, in the CVI ecosystem nationwide, and constantly assess where you are and where your partners are, because I think the benefits of that is always having a real conversation of what needs to happen.
Thank you again, all of our panelists, for sharing a lot of that great wisdom that you all have been able to hold. What I do want to do now is please allow a quick time for some question and answers. So you have two options. Feel free to either type some of your questions in the chat bar or raise your hand, and then somebody from the LISC team will allow you to unmute so that way you can ask the questions.
And Michelle has a really great question. She put that in the Q&A. She had asked for the panelists to answer. Many of the collaborative partners, it just got moved. Many of the partners have gotten promoted and are not in my district anymore. I'm happy for them, but the challenge is starting over with the person they are replaced with. And many are actually volunteered residents and they have their own battles and losses. That's another trust that has to be built. So maybe talk a little bit about the transitions at many of your partner organizations, and also working with residents that do this often out of the goodness of their heart and really want to help the community.
Yeah, did you want us to answer that, James, or somebody kind of?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we found with our partners is, and not necessarily the CBOs or the CVI, but even with law enforcement, where we have this level of engagement, we're in the ecosystem, things are kind of like, sorted out, like who's who. And then you have the musical chairs. Someone gets promoted, somebody gets reassigned, gets replaced, and now we have to really develop this professional understanding with the next person. Generally, what happens with us is that our anticipation, unfortunately for CVI here in LA, there's an anticipation that we're going to watch a lot of people get promoted, retire, move on, and we'll still be at the plow. This is probably the only occupation or field of work that you could get fired, retire, move on, and folks will still rely on you to provide their community service. It's just baked in you. It's just that's who you are. Doesn't matter if you change your phone number or whatever. You're kind of like branded at that point. So what we do, we just stay the course. As the new folks get onboarded, we get them acclimated to what we've done and what we're doing and what works, and how things work for us. But again, usually we're here to stay as other folks move on and get promoted. And those are great things and for them, but we're here for the community long term.
Thanks very much, Taco.
James, if I could
Go
just add to that real quick. Something we identified, and I think that us as nonprofits and CBOs, we sometimes forget when we talk about when we talk about professionalizing the work, there is a science to the work. And so something that we've done is that we've hired a consultant to come in and to help build out our leadership team. Like that's a science of management. Like here we are, a organization that oversees all these grants that are being paid a lot of money. We should have that infrastructure in place. A lot of times we don't know how to do that. So we've hired a consultant to come in to help us build out our leadership team. So if one of us does get promoted, that program manager is truly taking on the role of the deputy director or knows enough to where they can move into that place. So when that person's gone, if we don't have the funding to fill that position, some of those strategies and some of that knowledge is still placed within our infrastructure.
Eric had asked, what are some strategies for conducting a community assessment and evaluation? Eric, just wanted to point you towards an earlier webinar that we did called People, Place, and Thing that really focused on data. There's two big elements of community violence intervention. The work that you all are doing. One of them is obviously the relationships and the partnerships that we're talking about today. The second one is data and prioritizing your focus on the individuals and people that are most connected to community violence. So that first webinar, Eric, we covered people, place, and thing and talked about various strategies to utilize data to assess where you want to put your CVI resources. Continue to put your questions in the Q&A tab. We're gonna make sure that those questions get to the panel. I just want to say to the panelists, thank you very much. Melvin, Taco, Roy, Reverend Smith. I was telling Melvin separately, you all covered a lot of the small important things that folks often miss that are critical to sustaining this work in communities. A lot of folks, I think, Roy, you might have mentioned it, are really great at violence interruption. And Ben, I think, Taco, you also mentioned it. But some of these small details in being able to scale your organization and help it grow to meet the needs of the field and, be able to utilize your different partners to make sure that you're supporting the individuals that are closest to violence is super important. I'm going to use my background from New York to talk quick at the very end here. So just bear with me for about 5 more minutes. Again, thank you, Melvin, Taco, Reverend Smith, and Mr. Moore. That was really great. Before we leave you during these next few moments, I want to invite you to continue to engage the National CVI Resource and Field Support Center. There you will find a wide range of resources for your community seeking answers to violence and for policy and decision makers looking for replicable models. You're also going to find notices of upcoming conferences, training events. I know UPI, you do a number of really great trainings in California and across the country. So check those out. CVI grant opportunities, make sure you have access to resources, whether it be federal, state, or local resources. You can also sign up for our community of practice, which will get you additional resources through our virtual CVI community, where you can ask your peers questions, share your own resource tools, and access special events, such as I want to invite you to tomorrow's pop-up webinar. We're going to have a pop-up webinar tomorrow with one of our subject matter experts talking about the unique challenges of this work during the holiday season. I know you all know that this is tough during the entire year, but particularly during the holiday season. We're also going to be having a webinar on Thursday focusing on schools and organizations that are supporting youth coming and going from schools. This webinar is again going to be moderated by Melvin, highlighting collaborations to ensure youth are safe from violence going to and returning back from schools. My colleague Ryan is putting those registration links in the chat as well, We're also going to make sure that we send you an email. I think it's going to go out tomorrow with both of those links. So please check out both this pop-up community of practice peer engagement and our webinar. And as always, if there's anything that you, your organization or community has questions about or is impeding your CVI efforts, please send us a training and technical assistance request using the link above. I also want to encourage you to check out the CVIPI checklist tool. So today we talked a lot about, obviously community partnerships and building and sustaining these relationships. This all is part of the CVIPI checklist tool that provides steps to help your community create, build, and sustain this work. Check out the link. We're going to post that in the chat. You can also use the QR code. Here we have the 6 CVI checklist steps. Also, similarly to what Melvin talked about, the partners that can be part of your CVI organization. It talks about how to bring those partners together, create trusted relationships, clear scopes of work to support proactive intervention, active crisis situations, and addressing trauma and the potential of retaliatory violence. The checklist also addresses how you can strengthen that collaboration so you can sustain and build upon your existing CVI strategies. Again, here are the QR codes for those websites. We really look forward to hearing from you. And one final note prior to closing down, we would love to get your input on the quality of this webinar, and importantly, hear about your experiences trying to build a culture of collaboration for CVI. So we want to hear from you to utilize that survey tool to tell us about what's gone well and where there continues to be struggles around building a partnership and collaboration in your community. This is going to help us tell the story of this work and help guide future technical assistance supports. Again, greatly appreciate those that joined the call, both as panelists and attendees, and we greatly appreciate you taking the time to complete your survey. Best to you all, and on behalf of our LISC team, we hope that you have a happy and safe holiday season. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.